This truth has been hidden for 40 years. Veterans kept silent about it, hiding their ashamed eyes in glasses of vodka at comrades' reunions. It was not written about in commendation citations or death notifications. But I will tell the story. I will tell you what 20 healthy, strong men turn into, locked in a stone sack at an altitude of 3,000 meters and deprived of the world's principal drug: women. Do you think we dreamed of home, of mother's pies? Nonsense. After half a year at the Dragon's Tooth outpost, we dreamed of only one thing: soft skin, the smell of hair, the warmth of a woman. This hunger was more terrible than thirst, more terrible than the enemy's bullet. It burned our brains, turning us from internationalist Soviet soldiers into a pack of wild dogs in heat. On that day, May 17th, 1983, we made a pact with the devil. Our group returned from the raid, but not empty-handed. We didn't bring cartridges, we didn't bring a captured field commander. We dragged a sack into the base, an ordinary, dirty flour sack that was kicking and whimpering. The platoon commander, Senior Lieutenant Gromov, whom we called Dad behind his back, watched silently as we unloaded that living cargo onto the dusty plateau. Around us was the silence of the grave. You could only hear the heavy breathing of the 18 men who had surrounded the prey. "Untie it!" Gromov barked hoarsely. The sergeant yanked the rope. The sack fell. Before us stood she. A child of about 16 years, pitch-black braids, a torn dress, and eyes. In them struggled such terror that any normal man would have averted his gaze. But we did not avert ours. We looked at her the way hungry wolves look at a cornered deer. At that moment, for us, there were no regulations, oaths, or the Geneva Convention. There was only her body, here and now. Officially, women in Afghanistan did not exist for the simple soldier. There were the nurses and the intangible switchboard operators at headquarters, for whom the officers' line was formed half a year in advance. For their love, one paid with checks, Japanese tape recorders, and even combat decorations. And for us, simple conscripts, all that remained was to howl at the moon and flip through health magazines worn down to holes, looking for pictures of women in swimsuits. But here, in the mountains, there was no law. Here the law was the Kalashnikov automatic rifle and the right of the strong. The girl tried to jump to her feet, but the sergeant stepped on the hem of her dress with his heavy boot. She froze, pulling her head into her shoulders. "Well, what do we do, men?" Gromov cast a cloudy look over us. "Who is first? Or do we draw lots?" No one objected. No one said, "Comrade Lieutenant, she is a civilian. She is a child." Animal instinct suppressed everything human. The air filled with the heavy smell of sweat and lust. We knew we could be shot in front of the formation for this, but then, looking at her trembling lips, we didn't care. "Drag her to the bathhouse," Gromov commanded, undoing his belt buckle, "and set a guard, so not a single soul from headquarters finds out." Two burly fighters grabbed her under the arms. She didn't even scream. Her voice had vanished from fear. Her legs dragged on the stony ground, leaving 2 trails in the dust. Trails that led straight to hell. I stood in the guard cordon and watched them go. The bathhouse door closed with a heavy thud. The bolt clicked, and in the same second from behind the door came a sound I will not forget until death. The sound of tearing clothes. We looked at one another. In my comrade's eyes, I saw my own reflection. The reflection of a monster. We had crossed a line beyond which there is no return. War will erase everything. No, war does not erase something like this. Something like this stays with you forever, burning your soul with a red-hot iron. But the worst was yet to come. We still didn't know what price we would pay for these few hours of animal ecstasy. We didn't know that this girl was not a simple shepherdess. She was the daughter of the one whose name was spoken in whispers in these mountains. The sun was at its zenith, heating the stones to white, but we were shaking with chills. We stood at the bathhouse door, lined up in an uneven and gloomy row. 18 people, 18 Soviet boys, Komsomol members, whose photographs perhaps hung on honor boards in schools and factories. But now we resembled a line for vodka on the gloomiest, most desperate day. Only instead of the thirst, after drunkenness, another thirst burned us. A black one. Inside it was quiet. Too quiet. Only the creaking of old wooden benches and heavy breathing, and then a dull thud and a strangled moan. Soldier Kuznetsov, who stood in front of me, was nervously gnawing a hangnail on his finger. His hands were shaking. He was only 19 years old. He had never been with a woman yet. The first time and immediately like this. Not by candlelight, not with love, but in a dirty Armenian bathhouse, smelling of laundry soap and dampness. By turns, like cattle. The door creaked. Lieutenant Gromov appeared on the threshold. He was buttoning a button on his tunic. His face was red, wet. His eyes shone with a mad glint like drunkenness. He measured us with a look in which there was nothing human left. "She is alive," he muttered, spitting on the sand. "Don't strangle her completely. She will still be of use to us. Next!" The line moved. No one budged immediately. Fear and lust fought in each of us. That was the moment of truth. To take a step forward and become a beast, or to remain in place and become an outcast. In the army, the collective does not forgive those who play the saint. If you are not with us, you are against us. And here, at a height of 3,000 meters, to be against your own meant death. In battle, they simply won't cover you, or a bullet will accidentally fly into your back. Kuznetsov took a step forward. The door closed behind him. I was the fifth. Time crawled like thick tar. Every minute seemed like an hour. We didn't look each other in the eye. We looked at our boots, at the mountains, at the eagles flying in the sky. We tried to pretend that nothing terrible was happening, that it was just war, that we deserved it. "We spill blood here," someone whispered behind, as if excusing himself to himself. "We have the right." When my turn came, I entered as if in a fog. A heavy, sweet smell of sweat, male seed, and fear persisted in the bathhouse. The girl lay on the wooden floor. She no longer resisted. She looked at the ceiling with empty, glassy eyes, in which no tears remained. She resembled a broken doll that a bad child had thrown into a corner. Her clothes lay on the wet floor like dirty rags. Bruises were visible on her dark skin. She whispered something only with her lips. I didn't know the language, but I understood she was praying. She was praying to Allah to take her away from here, to take her life, just to end this endless nightmare. I did what I had come to do, quickly, brutally, without mercy, not because I wanted to cause pain, but because I wanted it to end faster, to run from there into the air and try to forget those eyes. But I knew I would not forget. I knew those eyes would come to me in nightmares in 10, 20, 40 years. When it was all over, we locked her in a small storage room next to the bathhouse, where we kept brooms and old basins. I threw her a flask of water and a piece of bread. Now she was our secret, our common sin, our trophy. In the evening we sat in the smoking area, lighting one cigarette after another. Conversations didn't stick. Everyone understood. We had crossed the Rubicon. Now we were bound by blood and violence, more tightly than by any oath. Suddenly the radio operator burst out of the radio booth, pale as death. "Comrade Lieutenant!" he shouted in a strangled voice. "The helicopter! A transport with an inspection is coming. They will be here in 40 minutes. Gromov jumped to his feet, overturning a crate of cartridges. "Who?" "A colonel from Army headquarters, and with him an officer from the special section, Osobist." The silence that fell over the outpost was heavier than a tombstone. The Osobist. If they find the girl, tribunal, execution, or disciplinary battalion, which is worse than death. We looked toward the bathhouse. There, behind the locked door, sat our death. A living proof that could destroy us all with a single word. Gromov slowly turned his head toward us. In his eyes, I saw the decision. A terrible decision. "We don't have time to hide her," he said quietly. "They will search every corner. They have dogs." He took the pistol from its holster and cocked it. The metallic click sounded like a sentence. "Smirnov, Kuznetsov, follow me. The rest, clean everything spotless. Make it all shine." I froze. I understood what he was planning. We had to erase the traces. And the best way to hide evidence at war is to turn it into Cargo 200, dead, or to make it so that it is never found. "Get up." Gromov kicked the storage room door. The girl flinched, curling into a ball in the darkest corner. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the intonation of death. She saw the pistol in the lieutenant's hand. In her eyes there was no pleading, only infinite fatigue and the expectation of the end. She knew she wouldn't leave here alive. "Out! Quickly!" Gromov yelled, grabbing her by the hair. She didn't resist. Her body was like cotton, devoid of will. Gromov dragged her brutally outside, into the anteroom. Kuznetsov stood nearby, white as chalk, trembling. In his hands was a sapper shovel. I had an old tarp in my hands. "Drag her behind the rocks, toward the precipice," the lieutenant hissed. "Where the garbage pit is, faster. The helicopter is already close. I hear the propellers." Indeed, in the distance, in the air shimmering with heat, the characteristic clatter could already be heard. Do, 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 do. The sound of salvation for some and the sound of doom for others. In 20 minutes, the officers from headquarters would be here. If they saw her. I grabbed the girl under the arms. She was surprisingly light, almost weightless, like a bird with broken wings. Her legs dragged on the ground, scraping her toes to blood on the stones, but she didn't even grimace. The pain, probably, had disconnected. I dragged her behind the yard, past the garbage pits, to where the plateau ended and the steep descent into the gorge began. There, among rusty cans and old crates, was a small crevice. The ideal place to hide what should never have existed. "Here!" Gromov threw out. He pushed the girl to the ground. She fell to her knees, letting her head hang down. Black hair scattered over her shoulders, covering her face. The lieutenant raised the pistol. His hand didn't tremble. He was doing his job, a dirty, terrible job, to save his own skin. "Turn away," he told me. I turned away. I looked toward the snowy and distant peaks of the Hindu Kush, so clean and majestic, and I felt nausea rising in my throat. The shot I almost didn't hear, just a dry click, similar to the snapping of a broken branch, and then the dull thud of the body on the ground. Kuznetsov whimpered. "Pack her up." Gromov's voice was absolutely calm, pragmatic. "And cover her with stones, so the jackals don't drag her away before it's time. Tonight we'll move her properly." We wrapped the body in the tarp. It was still warm. Blood soaked through the coarse fabric like a rapidly expanding dark stain. We threw stones, trash, and old rags over the tarp. In 5 minutes, in that place, there was just a pile of junk, which differed in no way from the rest of the garbage. We ran back to the barracks, wiping our hands with dirt as we went. The helicopter was already landing, raising clouds of dust. When the colonel stepped out of the helicopter, we stood in formation, clean, arranged, with faces of stone. Gromov reported briefly, "Comrade Colonel, the personnel of the Dragon's Tooth outpost are conducting housekeeping activities. No incidents recorded." The colonel inspected us, exactingly. His gaze slid over our faces, over our hands. I hid my hands behind my back. It seemed to me that blood was still visible on them, although I had scrubbed them to redness. The Osobist, a scrawny major with piercing eyes, walked silently along the formation. He stopped in front of Kuznetsov. The soldier went white. Beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. "Why are you trembling, soldier?" the special officer asked quietly. "I am guilty." "I get emotional, Comrade Major," Kuznetsov mumbled. "He is sick," Gromov intervened. "Fever, probably. I wanted to send him to the infirmary." The major scoffed, but moved away. The inspection lasted 3 hours. They rummaged through everything: the armory, the barracks, the kitchen, even the bathhouse. In the bathhouse, the Osobist lingered. He looked at the floor for a long time, then picked up a small, shiny object. It was a bead, an ordinary, cheap bead, detached from that girl's necklace. I stopped breathing. Gromov froze like a statue. "Interesting ornament you have here." The major twirled the bead between his fingers. "Where is it from?" "Ah," Gromov didn't blink. "Local merchants came, offered souvenirs. It seems they dropped it." The Osobist smiled ironically, tossed the bead into his palm, and put it in his pocket. "Merchants, so. Uh-huh." They left. We breathed a sigh of relief, but this relief brought us no peace. We had escaped the tribunal, but we knew that the real judgment was just ahead. At night I had a dream. I stood next to that crevice, and from under the stones flowed not blood, but black water. From this water she rose, alive. She didn't scream, didn't curse. She just looked at me, and in her hands was an infant. A dead infant. I woke up in a cold sweat. In the barracks it was quiet, only snoring, but suddenly I heard a strange sound outside. Not the sentry's steps, not the howl of the wind. It was the sound of rolling stones there, from the direction of the garbage pit. I woke Gromov. "Comrade Lieutenant, someone is there at the pit!" We jumped out with automatic rifles. The moon shone brightly, flooding the gorge with a cadaverous light. Near the trash heap, where we had hidden the body, stood 3 shadows. They didn't look like humans. They were wrapped in black, and their movements were fast and silent. They were digging the grave. "Fire!" Gromov howled, breaking the silence of the night. His rifle jerked in his hands, spitting tongues of fire. Tracer bullets furrowed the darkness with dotted lines of fire, smashing into the stones where the shadows had just stood. I also pulled the trigger without aiming, just squeezing the trigger out of animal fear. The roar of the shots reflected with an echo in the cliffs, amplifying many times, as if the mountains groaned in response. The shadows disappeared. They didn't fall. They didn't run. It was as if they dissolved in the air, merged with the darkness of the gorge. It wasn't infantry. They weren't ordinary enemies. They were ghosts. "To the pit!" the lieutenant commanded, changing the magazine. We ran to the burial site, lighting the way with pocket flashlights. The beam of light brought out of the darkness the churned earth, scattered stones, and emptiness. The tarp lay at the bottom, crumpled and empty. On it blackened a large stain, that girl's blood. But the body was not there. Gromov jumped down, kicked the tarp with his boot, as if hoping the body had hidden under it. But the miracle did not happen. "Damn it," he exhaled. "They dragged her away." A cold sweat passed over me, despite the sultriness of the night. If the body had been found by jackals or vultures, bones and rags would have remained. But here, people had worked. They had come in silence, right under the noses of the sentries, dug the grave, and taken her. This meant only one thing. They had seen everything. They knew who did it. They knew our faces. In Afghanistan, there is a law more terrible than Sharia and older than Islam. Pashtunwali, the code of honor, and its main point, Badal. Blood revenge. It has no statute of limitations. It knows no mercy. If you killed a woman, you dishonored the family. The whole clan will take revenge, until the last man of your kin. But first they will come for you. "We are leaving." Gromov's voice trembled. "Raise the outpost! Reinforce the guards! Everyone sleep hugging their rifles!" We returned to the barracks, but no one could sleep anymore. The news that the body had disappeared spread instantly. The boys sat on their beds, silent, grey. Kuznetsov was tormented in a corner and howled quietly, rocking from side to side. He understood that now he didn't have many days left. None of us did. Morning came painfully slowly. The sun rose red, sinister, colouring the mountain peaks the colour of that blood left on the tarp. We waited for the assault, waited for mortar bombardment, waited for the mountains to collapse upon us with a rain of lead. But the mountains were silent. The entire day passed in an oppressive silence that drove you out of your mind. No gunfire, no sound. Even the birds seemed to avoid our height. We looked through binoculars until our eyes hurt, trying to see movement among the stones, but we saw only dead stone and thorns. This silence was more terrible than any cannonade. The enemies were playing with us. They were giving us time to feel our fear, to drown in it. They knew that the expectation of death is worse than death itself. Toward evening, when the heat began to subside, the sentry in Tower 3 shouted, "Movement! On the path!" We all went out onto the parapet. Down below, on the narrow goat path that led to the village, stood an old man, alone, without a weapon. He was dressed in white, which made him a perfect target against the background of grey rocks. He slowly raised his hand and put something on a large, flat stone near the road. Then he turned and just as slowly, without looking back, walked away. "Do I take him down?" asked the sniper, pressing his cheek to the stock of the SVD rifle. "Stop it!" Gromov said hoarsely. "Let's see what he brought." In half an hour, when the old man disappeared from sight, we went down to the stone. Gromov went first, keeping his finger on the trigger. On the stone was a package made of expensive patterned fabric. Next to it stood a flower, a red tulip. Seeing this flower, the experienced fighters went pale. In Afghanistan, the red tulip is not just a plant, it is the name of a terrible execution. The prisoner is drugged, suspended by the hands. Then the skin around the waist is cut and pulled over the head, like a stocking. The man dies slowly, going mad from pain, while the sun dries his flesh. This was the message. Not only was war declared on us, we were promised hell. Gromov undid the package with his bayonet, the fabric unfolded. Inside were 18 pebbles and 18 cartridges. We at the outpost were exactly 18 men who had participated in what happened yesterday. They had counted us all. They knew each one. "This is for us," said Kuznetsov quietly, looking at the cartridges with glassy eyes. "One for each of us." Gromov kicked the stone and the cartridges scattered in the dust with a dry sound. "I don't care," he yelled, but there was hysteria in his shout. "Let them come. We have machine guns, we have armored vehicles, we'll lay them all on the ground. We are the Soviet army, damn it!" But his words drowned in the majestic silence of the mountains. The mountains had heard other shouts too, and the mountains knew, from this height, no one would leave alive. And at night, the hunt began. The first night after the package did not pass in an exchange of fire. The enemies were smarter. They knew we were waiting for the assault, that our fingers were white on the triggers, and machine guns stared into the darkness, ready to spit kilograms of lead. That is why they didn't come with war, they came with horror. We sat in the trenches, scrutinizing the darkness, so thick it seemed you could cut it with a knife. The mountains breathed coldness. Every rustle, every rolling stone, the squeak of a desert hare, the rustle of the wind in dry and thorny bushes, made our hearts jump into our throats. "3, this is 1. "Answer!" hissed the radio with the voice of the signals sergeant. "3 receiving, sector clear," answered the hoarse voice of Private Polyanin. Polyanin was from Perm, a burly red-headed guy who could bend a horseshoe. He was at the farthest post, near the path that led to the water tank. It was the most dangerous place. But Polyanin feared neither the devil nor the enemy. He only feared spiders. Funny, isn't it? A huge paratrooper feared some small phalanges. At 3 o'clock in the morning, the ether went silent. 3, this is 1, report, the radio hissed again. Silence. Just static crackling, similar to frying bacon in a pan. 3! Polyanin, damn you, don't sleep! The silence became dense, sinister. Gromov, who was sitting next to me in the bunker, slowly raised his head. His eyes, inflamed from insomnia and rubbing alcohol, narrowed. "Smirnov, Kuznetsov, check post 3, on the double." I froze. To go there, into the darkness, where one of the best fighters had just gone silent, was equivalent to suicide. But an order is an order. Kuznetsov and I crawled out of the shelter. Kuznetsov was trembling so hard that the chattering of his teeth seemed audible all the way to Kabul. "Shut up!" I hissed at him. "They'll hear us!" We crawled on our bellies, elbows and knees skinned by sharp stones. 200 meters seemed like infinity. The air smelled of wormwood and stone cooled overnight. We reached the parapet of post 3, empty. The machine gun stood on the tripod, looking with its black barrel toward the gorge. Nearby lay a thrown helmet, an unopened pack of hunting cigarettes, and nothing else. No signs of struggle, no cartridge casings, no blood. Polyanin had simply disappeared, evaporated like smoke. "Where is he?" asked Kuznetsov, only with his lips. I shone the flashlight down, beyond the parapet. The beam of light slid over the barbed wire stretched in 3 rows, and down there, on the slope. Something glinted. We climbed down. What we found made Kuznetsov double over at the waist and empty the contents of his stomach directly onto his boots. Polyanin was there, but it was no longer him. They hadn't killed him with a bullet. They hadn't cut him with a knife. Him, alive and strong boy, they simply disassembled. He hung on the barbed wire, crucified like a scarecrow. His mouth was sewn shut with thick thread, with black and crude stitches so he wouldn't scream. And on his chest, right on the striped shirt, was carved with a knife a single word. Not in Farsi, but in Russian, with crooked but legible letters. 1. Not only had they killed him, they were playing with us. They had shown us that they could come right next to us, eliminate the sentry, commit that atrocity on him, and leave unnoticed. It was a level of training we hadn't even dreamed of. These weren't shepherds with old rifles. They were professionals, shadows. We dragged the body into the base. When Gromov saw Polyanin's sewn mouth for the first time since I've known him, he crossed himself with his left hand. "Circular defense!" he yelled so loud he tore his voice. "No one sleeps. Fire at any rustle. Flares in the air every 5 minutes." We spent the rest of the night in hell. We fired into the darkness, consuming entire crates of ammunition. Signal flares hung in the sky, flooding the mountains with a dead, phosphorescent light. It seemed to us that the stones were moving, that the bushes were crawling toward us. We killed 2 jackals and 1 hare. But we didn't kill the fear. In the morning, when it got light, we saw that the entire cliff opposite our base, about 500 meters away, was covered in inscriptions. Overnight, while we were shooting into the void, someone had painted huge numbers on the rocks with paint, 15. They were counting down. We were left with 17, and they were letting us know. The next night will take 1 or 2 more. "Radio operator!" barked Gromov. "Call the helicopters. Request evacuation of a wounded man. Say Polyanin is alive, but serious. Get us the hell out of here." The radio operator, a pale boy with huge headphones, clicked the switches. "Comrade Lieutenant!" His voice trembled. "The ether!" "What about the ether?" "They are jamming us on all frequencies. Oriental music and laughter can be heard." We were trapped. We had no connection, no help, down in the gorge, an enemy who knew our faces and was thirsty for blood. And inside the base, we were 18. No, already 17 criminals who understood punishment is inevitable. During the day, the heat became unbearable. Polyanin's corpse, wrapped in a tent sheet, lay in the shadow of the earthen wall, but the sweet smell of decomposition had already started to seep out, mixing with the smell of bleach with which we had sprinkled everything around. And then Kuznetsov found this. He went to the storage shed for water. A minute later, a wild, sharp howl was heard from there. We rushed there. Kuznetsov stood in the middle of the room, pointing with a trembling finger at his bed. There, on the grey army blanket, lay a head. The severed head of that dog, the mongrel Nida, who had taken up with us a month ago, and whom we all fed with canned meat. In the dead dog's teeth a note was clenched, a sheet from a math notebook. On it was written, "Women give birth to warriors. You killed a woman, now warriors will kill you. Tonight the water will turn red." Gromov snatched the note, crumpled it, and threw it on the floor. "Check the water tank," he shouted quickly. But no one budged from their place. The tank was down below, 100 meters from the base, near the stream. To go there meant going into the claws of those who could sew a living man's mouth shut and pass through minefields. "I'll go alone." Gromov snatched the rifle from the nearest soldier. "Cowards, old women." He left alone. We looked after him, and each of us thought the same thing. Let them kill him. Let them kill the commander. Maybe then they will be satisfied. Maybe then they will leave us alone. We had betrayed not only that girl. We had started to betray each other. Lieutenant Gromov went down toward the stream slowly, as if walking to the scaffold. We lay on the parapet, pressing our sweating bodies against the hot stones, and watched through scopes. Every step of the commander resonated in our temples like a dull blow. 100 meters in open terrain. The ideal target. We waited for the shot, waited for that dry, popping sound to announce that there was no more commander. But the shot did not come. The mountains kept a grave silence. Gromov reached the thicket of reeds that hid the spring. He disappeared into the greenery. 1 minute, 2, 5. Time stretched into an endless string, ready to snap and whip across our nerves. Only the buzzing of flies and Kuznetsov's heavy breathing to my right could be heard. Suddenly the bushes moved. Gromov came out stumbling, holding a single flask in his hand. He wasn't walking, he was running, stumbling, falling to his knees, jumping to his feet again. His face was white as chalk, even through the thick layer of dust and tan. His mouth was open in a silent scream. He sped into the base territory, jumping over the parapet, and fell on his back, gulping air greedily. "Water!" rasped one of the soldiers. "He brought it!" Gromov looked wildly at us, then with a trembling hand unscrewed the cap of the flask and turned it over. Onto the dry, cracked earth poured a thick, dark red liquid. It wasn't water, it was blood. Fresh blood, still warm, mixed with mud and sheep entrails. Gromov coughed, vomited bile. They slaughtered the whole flock right there in the spring, blocked the stream with carcasses. There is no more water there, there is a slaughterhouse. We looked at the red puddle, soaking into the sand. Realization came slowly, but when it hit us, it was more terrible than being under mortar bombardment. We were left without water, at an altitude of 3,000 meters under the burning sun. Where a man dries out in a day. We had 2 reserve tanks. That's for 2 days, if we save every drop. And then we will start drinking our own urine, and then we will go mad. This is a blockade, I said quietly. They won't attack us. They will wait until we croak on our own. In the evening of the same day, thirst became an obsession. It seemed the air had become dry and prickly, like sandpaper. We licked our cracked lips and looked down at the green strip near the stream, which had now become a forbidden zone for us, a zone of death. And then the radio station came to life. Suddenly, through the crackling of parasites and the howls of Oriental music, a clear, calm voice broke through. He spoke in Russian, without an accent. That scared us the most. Enemies don't speak like that. It was the voice of an educated man, maybe a former teacher or engineer, who had now taken up a weapon. "Soldiers," said the voice. "I know you hear me. I know your throats have dried up. I know you are looking at the water that has turned red from sin." Gromov rushed to the station and grabbed the microphone. "Who is speaking? Show yourself, damn it! I'll tear you apart with my teeth!" "Don't waste your strength, Lieutenant Gromov," the voice answered. He knew his name. "You will need it to die. You have 17 left. But Allah is merciful. We don't want to kill everyone. We only need one." Silence fell in the bunker. Everyone turned their heads toward the speaker. "The one who pulled the trigger," continued the calm and insinuating voice. "The one who killed an innocent girl. Give him to us alive. Bring him out the gate and leave him on the road. If you do this by sunrise, we will let you go. We will give you water. We will let you cross to your own." "Don't listen!" yelled Gromov, ripping the wires from the station. "It's a provocation. They are lying. They will cut us all." But the station had gone silent on its own. Gromov breathed heavily, measuring us with a mad look. He was looking for support, looking for loyalty. But in the soldier's eyes, he saw something else. I looked at Kuznetsov. He sat with his knees pulled to his chest and looked at the lieutenant. In his gaze, there was no longer fear of the officer. There was an animal calculation, a simple arithmetic of survival, 1 life in exchange for 16. "Comrade Lieutenant," said the sergeant dully, a burly man from the Urals who had been silent until then. "Only you finished her off. We just used her, but as for killing, you killed her." Gromov backed away. His hand went to his holster. "What is with you?" he whispered. "What is with you, boys? Did you think to surrender your own? Do you want a tribunal?" "One has to live until the tribunal," the sergeant answered, standing up slowly. "And we are thirsty for a drink now." The click of a bolt. I took my rifle off safety. I don't know why myself. My fingers simply reacted faster than my brain. Gromov heard the sound. He understood that he was left alone, in that cramped and stifling room, among people with whom he had shared bread for half a year. He had suddenly become a stranger. He had become that weight pulling the boat to the bottom. "Traitors," he exhaled. "Judases." Outside, in the darkness of the mountains, someone laughed again, loudly, with an echo. And on the cliff opposite, a new inscription lit up, formed of burning rags. 16. They had already subtracted him. They knew what we would do. They knew human nature better than we did ourselves. Gromov pulled his gun. The shot boomed in the tight space of the bunker like a sledgehammer blow to the head. The bullet hissed, slamming into the clay ceiling and sprinkling dry earth over us. Gromov missed. The hand that yesterday had sent a bullet into the back of a child's head with cold blood, today trembled in front of his own soldiers. In the next second, we threw ourselves upon him. It wasn't a fair fight. It was a pile-up, a mountain of sweating and snarling bodies. We beat our commander, beat him with rifle butts, with boots, with fists. We were taking out our fear, our guilt, our thirst on him. The sergeant, the same one who had first proposed handing over the lieutenant, twisted Gromov's wrist with a crack, tearing the pistol away. "Tie him!" rasped the sergeant. "Tie him with wire!" Gromov howled. Not from pain, but from helpless rage and humiliation. An officer, a communist, a platoon commander, rolled in the dust, pinned to the earthen floor by the knees of those he considered dumb cattle. We twisted his hands behind his back with field telephone cable, the insulation cutting into his flesh. When we lifted him, he was terrible. A split lip, a swollen eye, a torn tunic without epaulets. Someone had torn off his epaulets in the scuffle, as if depriving him of the last right to call himself a man. "You will die," Gromov whispered, spitting bloody foam. "You will all die here. Do you think they will pity you? They will slaughter you like rams. I am your only chance. You are our ticket out, Lieutenant," I answered him. My voice felt foreign, hollow. Something inside me had died the moment I kicked the commander in the belly. Conscience, honor. No, the hope of remaining human had died. We had transformed into what the enemies wanted to turn us into traitors. I dragged him toward the exit. 17 people were escorting a single one. Outside, there was a pre-dawn fog, the coldest and most desolate time of the day, when the world looks like it is drawn with dirty ink. We reached the gates, welded from rusty pipes and barbed wire. Down on the road it was quiet, not a soul, only the wind carrying swirls of dust. "Open up!" the sergeant commanded. Kuznetsov, whimpering, pulled the heavy bolt. The gates opened with a creak, releasing us from prison into the unknown. I shoved Gromov out onto the stony road. He dug his heels in, trying to turn back into the saving perimeter of the base. "Don't do this, guys! Ion, Sergei." He called us by name, for the first time in half a year of service. He was crying. "Move! Damn it!" The sergeant pushed him hard in the back with the butt of his rifle. Gromov fell to his knees, then stood up slowly. He looked at us. In that look, there was neither hatred nor fear, only an infinite, bottomless amazement. As if he didn't believe all this was happening in reality. "Forgive me," he said softly and walked away. He walked down the road, swaying, hands tied in the direction of the black mouth of the canyon. We stood at the gates and watched his back. We waited for the gunshot. We waited for them to kill him right then, before our eyes, but the shot did not come. From behind a large boulder, about 50 meters from us, some shadows detached themselves. 3 figures. They approached Gromov. I saw one of them say something to him. Then they put a bag over his head, not brutally, almost with care. They took him by the arms and led him away. He did not resist. In 1 minute, they disappeared around the bend of the path. We remained alone. The silence rang in our ears. We did this. We sold the commander. We bought our lives at the price of his life. "And where is the water?" someone rasped from behind. They had promised water, and as if in answer to these words, down by the stream, a thud was heard. Not the explosion of a grenade, but a dull, heavy sound, as if a boulder had fallen. We rushed to the parapet. The sun was just beginning to peek from behind the peaks, coloring the world in pink tones. We looked down toward the spring. Where just yesterday the carcasses of slaughtered sheep lay, now it was clean. The corpses had disappeared. The water in the stream was clear again, sparkling in the sun. The path was free. "They kept their word," Kuznetsov exhaled. "They left." The soldiers began to howl with joy. Someone threw his hat in the air. Someone started hugging others. We survived. The nightmare was over. The nightmare. Gromov was the sacrifice the gods of war demanded. And we offered it. "To the water!" the sergeant yelled. "Fill the canteens, quickly!" The crowd, forgetting caution, forgetting the combat guard, rushed down the slope. Men ran toward the water like madmen, tripping, falling, racing each other. I ran with them. Thirst burned my throat, making me forget everything in the world. We fell with our faces into the freezing torrent. We drank, choking, snorting, splashing water. It was the tastiest water of my life. It was sweet as nectar. We drank and laughed, drunk with relief. We did not notice how silhouettes appeared on the peaks of the cliffs surrounding the canyon. We did not see how tens of barrels aimed at us from top to bottom. We were too busy with our happiness, the happiness of traitors. I understood what had happened. only when the first stone, dislodged from under someone's foot up above, fell into the water near Kuznetsov's head. We raised our heads. There were hundreds. They stood on the ridges of the cliffs, surrounding us in a tight ring, mujahideen. They were not hiding. They stood tall, and their clothes fluttered in the wind. They looked at us silently. We were down in the canyon, as if in a shooting range, without cover, without a commander, without honor. And then the voice, the same calm voice from the radio, rang out over the canyon, amplified by a megaphone. "Drink, Shiravi! Drink your fill, wash away your sins. The water is clean, but is your conscience?" I looked at the water in my palms, and it seemed to me that it had turned red again. The moment the first stone hit the water, the splashes seemed like boiling water to me. I froze. 17 men kneeling in the freezing stream, with wet faces, with bellies swollen from greed. We looked not like soldiers of the great empire, but like a herd of frightened cornered sheep. We had thrown our rifles on the bank. In the mad dash for water, we left the weapons 5-10 steps away from us. These meters had now become an impassable abyss. "Don't shoot!" the sergeant screamed hysterically, raising his wet hands. "We have a deal! We gave you the lieutenant! We fulfilled the conditions!" His shout hit the rocks and returned as a pitiful echo. From above, from a bird's-eye view, hundreds of eyes watched us. The black barrels of their rifles, of old guns and captured new automatics, looked straight into our souls. The man with the megaphone spoke again. Now I saw him, a tall figure in a black turban, standing right on the edge of the precipice, above us. "The deal was with men." His voice thundered, drowning out the noise of the wind. "A man keeps his word. A man defends his commander. A man does not kill a defenseless woman. But you are not men. You are jackals. And one does not make deals with jackals. Jackals are exterminated." He made a hand signal. The crowd of mujahideen on the cliffs parted. 2 sturdy bearded men dragged a man to the edge of the precipice. Gromov. He was still alive. His face had turned into a bloody mask. His hands hung like ropes. They had probably broken all his bones. But he was conscious. He looked down at us, those swarming in the mud by the stream. I met his gaze and expected to see hatred, curses there. But there was only emptiness and pity. He pitied us, his killers. "Look!" the voice roared in the megaphone. "Look at what your life costs." One of the bearded men pulled out a wide, curved knife. The sun shone threateningly on the blade. They put Gromov on his knees. He did not resist. He straightened his back as much as he could and raised his head to the sky. He was dying like an officer. We were living like traitors. The movement of the knife was quick and professional. Gromov didn't even scream. His body went limp, and a powerful kick sent him flying. We watched our commander fly down. This lasted, it seemed, for an eternity. And then a heavy thud was heard. Gromov's body fell right into the pool of water from which we had just drunk. The water rose like a fountain, droplets hitting me on the face. I licked a drop from my lips and tasted salt and iron. The water around the body instantly began to turn red. The lieutenant's blood, thick and hot, mixed with the freezing torrent, coloring it the color they had promised us. "Drink!" the voice yelled from above. "Drink the blood of your commander! Fill yourselves up!" Next to me, Kuznetsov writhed in convulsions. He was vomiting. He scratched the gravel with his nails, trying to spit out that water that was already inside him. And then hell began. They didn't start shooting immediately. No, that would have been too merciful. They started throwing stones. Huge boulders flew from above, gaining speed, whistling in the air. The first stone hit the sergeant in the shoulder, shattering his clavicle. He howled, rolling in the shallow water. The second stone slammed with a crunch into the radio operator's back. We thrashed at the bottom of the canyon like rats in a barrel. We had nowhere to run. The walls were steep. We couldn't climb up. The road back to the base was completely exposed to fire. I threw myself toward the bank where my rifle lay. Stones struck all around, sparking. One hit me glancingly on the helmet. My head rang. Red circles appeared before my eyes. I fell onto the sand, covering my head with my hands. Kuznetsov fell next to me. He was crawling, dragging himself on his elbows. His legs were crushed. "Mom," he whimpered. "Mommy, take me. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to drink." The gunshot sounded lonely and dry. Kuznetsov's head jerked, and he fell face down in the wet sand. The sniper. They started to eliminate us, slowly, methodically, savoring every shot. They were playing target practice. "Run!" I yelled, not knowing myself to whom. There were no more than 10 of us left. The rest were already lying in the water, mixing their blood with Gromov's blood. I jumped to my feet and, dodging like a hare, threw myself into the thicket of stiff reeds. Bullets kicked up small fountains of dust at my feet. Whiz-whiz, they sang their song of death. I flew into the dense greenery, scratching my face on the hard stems, and fell into a foul-smelling bog. I lay there, buried in silt, and listened. I listened to my comrades screaming. I listened to them begging for mercy. I listened as these pleas were cut short by gunshots or the dull blows of rifle butts. The Mujahideen began to descend to finish off the wounded. I heard Skvoritz, the one who used to laugh in the bathhouse. "Don't cut! Don't cut!" he screamed, then choked on his own cry. I clamped my hand over my mouth, biting my palm until it bled so I wouldn't scream in terror. I was the last one, the last witness to our shame. I lay in the mud 5 meters from where they were slaughtering my platoon and prayed not for salvation, but to die quickly. But fate had other plans for me, terrible plans. Suddenly the reeds parted. A shadow fell over me. I looked up. A young Afghan, almost a child, was looking at me. In his hands was an automatic rifle, and in his eyes an icy calm. He didn't shoot, he smiled. That smile was scarier than the grin of a skull. "I found you," he said softly in broken Russian. "Alive, good. For you, we have a special gift." He whistled. And then I understood death would have been a gift, and what awaited me was life. Life in captivity among those whose honor we had taken. They didn't kill me on the spot. Death is too simple. Death is a deliverance, and they wanted me to drink my guilt in sips for a long time, until I choked. They tied my hands behind my back with a rough horsehair rope that cut into my wrists down to the bone. They tied the other end of the rope to the saddle of a skinny and vicious horse. The rider, that young Mujahideen with eyes of ice, kicked the horse with his heels. And we set off. I walked, or rather I ran, I stumbled, I fell, and then the horse dragged me over sharp stones, flaying the skin from my knees and chest, until I jumped back to my feet, rasping with pain. We passed through the field of slaughter. I saw them all. 17 bodies scattered near the stream like broken toys. The water had already washed the blood off the stones, but it couldn't wash away the smell. A sweet, sickly smell of fresh meat, where fat green flies were already gathering. I saw Kuznetsov. He lay face down in the water, his light hair moving in the current as if he were alive. I saw the sergeant. He had frozen with his mouth open, full of silt. They had received their water. They had filled themselves with it forever. "Look, Shuravi!" the rider shouted, without turning around. "Remember the road! This is the road to hell." We climbed the path leading to that Kishlak village. The sun, which in the morning seemed like salvation, had now turned into an executioner. It burned my shaven head, dried my eyes. I was thirsty. God, how thirsty I was. It was a cruel irony of fate. I had survived the slaughter at the water only to die of thirst. When we entered the Kishlak, I expected to see armed, bearded men, but they didn't meet us. The women met us. There were many, dozens of black figures wrapped in veils. They stood along the narrow street, forming a living corridor. And they were silent. This silence was more frightening than any scream. In their hands were stones, clubs, pieces of dried mud. As soon as the horse dragged me past the first woman, the beating began. They hit me not with the hatred of a warrior toward a warrior, they hit me with the disgust with which one hits a mangy dog. Stones flew at my head, ribs back. The women spat on me. Someone threw slop in my face. The stinking muck flooded my eyes, entered my mouth. I coughed, fell, and the horse dragged me on the ground for another 10 meters, while a rain of blows fell on my body. I didn't scream. I had no strength. I had turned into a piece of meat in which only one thought pulsed. Let it end already. Finally, the horse stopped. We were in the central square of the Kishlak, right in front of that mosque where the mullah called to prayer. In the center of the square, a deep pit was dug. Zindan, the prison for those who cannot be forgiven. The rider dismounted, approached me, and with one movement cut the rope. "Stand up," he said. I stood up with difficulty. My legs were trembling, blood flooded my face. Did you think you were a hero? He asked softly, looking me in the eyes. Did you think you came to liberate us? You came to kill our daughters. Now you will live in the earth, like a worm, until you become earth yourself. They pushed me in the back. I flew into darkness. The impact of the bottom knocked the wind out of me. The pit was deep, about 4 meters, smooth clay walls. Above, only a small square of blindingly blue sky. The pit reeked of rot, excrement, and fear. I was not the first guest here. When my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw that I was not alone at the bottom. In a corner lay bones. Human bones, gnawed clean by rats. A skull grinned at me from the dark, as if greeting the new tenant. Above, a shadow fell on the square of the sky. Someone looked into the pit. "Hey, Sharavi!" a voice was heard. Down flew a flatbread, dry, covered in mold, and a plastic bottle at the bottom of which wobbled murky yellow water. "Eat, gather strength. Tomorrow is the judgment, the great judgment. The father of that girl will come. He wants very much to look you in the eyes." The light from above was covered with a heavy wooden grate. It became dark as a grave. I remained alone with the rats, the bones, and my memory, which was now more frightening than any torture. I crawled toward the bottle, opened it with trembling hands, took a sip. The water was warm and stank of urine, but I drank. I drank and cried, smearing tears and mud on my face. I had survived, but I envied the dead. The night in the pit lasted longer than my whole life up to then. In the darkness, time ceased to exist. I didn't sleep a single second. I listened to the rustles. At first they were quiet, cautious, but soon they turned into the brazen sound of hundreds of small claws scratching on the clay walls. Rats. They had come to the smell of clotted blood on my wounds. Huge, fat beasts, fattened on scraps and probably on the flesh of my predecessors. I felt their touch. Cold, wet noses poked my legs, hands, neck. I defended myself, waved my hands, screamed in the darkness, but my voice drowned in the death well of the Zindan. One of the beasts managed to nip my ear. The pain was sharp, instantaneous, but the fear was stronger than the pain. I understood. If I fall asleep, I will wake up a gnawed skeleton. I sat with my back pressed against the cold clay and gripped that femur bone I found at the bottom. It was my only weapon, the weapon of a dead man handed to a living one so that he could postpone his death by a few more hours. When dawn appeared in the square of sky above, I was on the verge of madness. The grate flew aside with a crash. A bright, sharp light hit my eyes, blinding me. "Get out, jackal!" a voice shouted from above. A rope with a noose at the end fell into the pit. I didn't want to put it on. I knew it would pull me not toward freedom, but toward the scaffold. But stones began to fly from above. One hit me on the shoulder, another on the head. I, sobbing, put my hands and head into the noose. The jerk was sudden. The rope dug into my armpits, squeezing my ribcage. They pulled me up like a bucket of slop from a well. I scratched the wall with my feet, flaying my last shreds of skin. When they pulled me over the edge and threw me onto the dusty ground, I couldn't open my eyes. The sun seemed like red-hot iron. "Get up!" A kick from a boot under the ribs made me curl up. They grabbed me by the armpits and dragged me. I could hear the roar of the crowd. It seemed the whole Kishlak had gathered. Hundreds of voices merged into a monotonous, unified roar, resembling the hum of a disturbed hive. But when they brought me out to the middle of the square, the roar ceased instantly. They threw me to my knees! I peeled my pus-filled eyelids apart with difficulty. In front of me, on a platform covered with a patterned rug, sat an old man. He did not look like those dirty, ragged mujahideen who shot at us in the mountains. His clothes were immaculate, his turban ideally wrapped. His face, furrowed with deep wrinkles, was calm and majestic. But his eyes, in them was such an abyss of pain and frozen hatred that I wanted to collapse back into the pit with the rats. It was him, the father. Next to him stood 2 men with automatic rifles, and a little further away, women in black. The old man raised his hand and the crowd froze, afraid even to breathe. "Do you know who I am?" he asked softly. He spoke in Pashto, but the young man next to him, the same one who had captured me, translated into Russian. I shook my head. My tongue was stuck to the roof of my mouth. "I am Halimbek," said the old man. "I am a teacher. For 40 years I taught the children of this valley to read and write. I taught them that human sounds proud, that a guest is God's messenger." He paused. His fingers squeezed the wooden prayer beads so hard that his knuckles turned white. "Yesterday, you came into my house. You were not guests, you were beasts. You took my daughter, Gulchokra. She was 15 years old. She loved poetry and embroidery with silk. She was my heart." The old man stood up slowly. He approached me. I could smell his cologne, expensive, astringent, mixed with the smell of old tobacco. He leaned down and looked straight into my pupils. "You broke my flower. You trampled it with dirty boots. And then you killed it like a useless thing, and you thought the mountains would hide your sin." "I didn't kill," I rasped. It was true. I had only held the door. I had only stood in line. I had only kept silent. Halimbek struck me not with a fist. He struck me with an open palm across the face. It was a loud, humiliating, burning slap. "Silence!" His voice broke into a scream. "You breathed the same air as the killer. You guarded him. You are as much a shaitan as he is." He straightened up and turned to the crowd. "People," he proclaimed. "The Quran says, an eye for an eye. But the life of this worm is not worth the life of my daughter. Death for him is a gift. We will not give him a gift." The crowd began to roar approvingly. The women started to wail, long and frighteningly. "We will return him to his own," said Halimbek. Everything froze inside me. Return me? Will they really let me go? Hope, weak and timid, began to tremble in my chest. "But we will return him in such a way," the old man continued, and his voice became hard as steel, "that every Shiravi and every soldier who sees him will understand. You are not allowed to touch our women. We will make a living letter out of him." He signaled the young translator. The man took a knife from his belt, long, curved, with a bone handle. "Undress him," ordered Halimbek. Dozens of hands grabbed me, tore off the remnants of my tunic, ripped my trousers. I remained naked, pitiful, shivering in the wind in the middle of the hostile crowd. I tried to cover myself with my hands, but they twisted them behind my back and tied them so tight that my joints cracked. "Put him on his back," the old man commanded, "and hold him well." They slammed me into the dust. 4 sturdy men sat on my arms and legs, pinning me to the ground. I looked at the sky. It was so clean, so indifferent, a blue abyss in which there was no God. The young man with the knife approached me. He crouched down near my groin area. In his eyes there was no malice, only professional concentration, like a surgeon before an operation or a butcher. "No," I whimpered. "No, please, kill me. Better kill me." Halimbek stepped on my chest with his heavy boot, squeezing the air out of me. "We have time to kill you any time," he said. "First we will take from you that with which you prided yourself, that with which you sinned. You will never be a man again. You will be a bacha, an empty place." The blade of the knife touched my skin. The cold steel burned my lower abdomen. I screamed. I drew air into my chest to let out a scream that should have torn my throat. But in that second, covering my scream, covering the roar of the crowd and the voice of the mullah, another sound crashed down from the sky. A rhythmic thumping, growing, shaking the earth. Do-do-do. The shadows of giant crosses slid across the square. Helicopters. The world exploded. It didn't just fill with sound, it became sound itself, dense, vibrant, shattering eardrums. It wasn't thunder. It was the roar of angry dragons. The Mi-24 helicopters, the crocodiles, entered the combat course right over the roofs of the clay houses. Their bellies, heavy with death, passed so low that the vortex of the propellers tore the turban from Halimbek's head. I saw the old man's eyes dilate. In them there was no fear for his own life. In them was the understanding. The judgment is cancelled, the slaughter begins. "Allah Akbar!" shouted the young translator, raising the knife. He wanted to finish what he started. He wanted to take my manhood with him to the grave, as a trophy. But he didn't get the chance. The earth around us rose to its feet. Guided rockets launched from the pylons of the helicopters plowed the square. The shockwave threw me like a rag doll and tossed me aside, straight into a puddle of warm blood. I went deaf. The world turned into a silent movie, full of fire, smoke, and flying pieces of human bodies. Where 1 second ago Halim Bek and his entourage stood, now a crater smoked. I saw the old man's hand, still clutching the prayer beads, rolling separately from the body in the dust. From the Mi-8 transport helicopters, hovering 1 meter from the ground, men began to jump. Spetsnaz. They jumped into this inferno lightly, habitually, immediately scattering in a fan formation and spraying everything alive with lead. Their faces were hidden by masks, only their angry, narrowed eyes were visible. One of them, huge in a faded Gorka suit, ran toward me. I lay naked, bound, smeared with mud and foreign blood, curled in a fetal position. I was whimpering. I didn't understand that they were ours. It seemed to me they were demons come to take me to the lowest circle of hell. The fighter turned me sharply onto my back. The barrel of his automatic rifle pressed into my forehead. "Clean!" he yelled, drowning out the roar of the turbines. "Slav, alive!" He pulled out a knife. I jerked, covering my groin area with my tied hands, screaming wildly. The memory of what they wanted to do to me 1 second ago was stronger than reason. "Quiet, quiet, brother! We are yours!" The Special Forces soldier skillfully cut the ropes. "Get up! We're leaving!" He ripped off his tactical vest, took off his jacket, and threw it over my naked shoulders. The rough fabric smelled of sweat, gun oil, and tobacco. This smell hit my nose, and only then did I start to cry. I sobbed loudly, choking on snot, clinging to this unknown man like a drowning man to a log. "Load him up!" someone commanded nearby. "We're leaving! The enemies are coming down from the mountains! It's going to get hot here now!" They grabbed me by the armpits and dragged me toward the helicopter. My legs wouldn't obey me. I dragged them on the ground, flaying them to blood on stones, but I didn't feel the pain. In the open door of the helicopter sat the machine gunner, spraying the roofs of houses with bursts. Shell casings fell to the floor like a noisy golden rain. They threw me inside, onto a hard duralumin bench. The propellers howled, pinning me to the wall. The helicopter, lifting its nose, abruptly started upward, dodging possible fire from grenade launchers. I looked out the porthole. Below, in clouds of reddish dust, the Kishlak was burning. Halim Bek's house was burning. That square, which was supposed to become the place of my execution, was burning. I burned them. I killed them all, women, old men, those who hit me with stones, and those who just stood and watched. Opposite me sat a young lieutenant from the Special Forces. He smoked, dragging greedily on a cigarette, and looked at me. In his gaze was a mixture of pity and disgust. He saw my naked body. Under the jacket he saw the bruises, the abrasions, the marks from the ropes. He understood what was happening there. "Are you alone?" he asked, leaning toward my ear. "Where are the others? Where is Gromov's group?" I looked at him with empty, burnt eyes. "There is no more group," I whispered. My voice resembled the creak of a rusty door. "There is no one." "But Gromov! The commander, where is he?" I remembered Lieutenant Gromov's flight from the cliff. I remembered the bloody water in the stream. I remembered how we, 17 traitors, drank that water. "He died, like a hero," I lied. I lied easily, without hesitation, because the truth was too frightening to be spoken aloud. The truth would have killed me right here, on board. The lieutenant nodded and handed me a flask. "Here, take a sip. It's pure spirit. It will make it easier." I took the flask with trembling hands, took a sip. The liquid fire burned my throat, fell into my empty stomach like a hot ball. I felt nauseous, but I held it in. We were flying over the mountains, the same mountains that silently watched our fall. I was alive. I had hands, legs. I remained a man. But inside me was a scorched desert. I left there, in that canyon, not only my comrades. I left my soul there. The helicopter was heading for the base in Bagram. There, the hospital, interrogations by counterintelligence officers, long months of treatment, and the return home awaited me. Home. I closed my eyes and saw my mother. She was smiling and making pies. She was waiting for a hero, a defender son, but flying toward her was a creature that sold its commander for a sip of water, a creature that survived only because the dead were too disgusted to take it. "Hey, soldier!" The lieutenant touched my shoulder. "How are you holding up?" I raised my eyes to him. "I want to wash," I said. "I really want to wash." He nodded understandingly, but he didn't know. He didn't know that neither with water, nor with soap, nor with any acid in the world would I be able to wash off what had stuck to me in these 3 days. The smell of betrayal. The hospital in Tashkent met me with whiteness. White walls, white coats, white sheets. This light hurt my eyes. I had gotten used to reddish grey and brown, the colours of dust, stones, and clotted blood. Here it smelled of chlorine and carbolic acid, but even these strong smells could not cover that stench I had brought with me. The smell of a rotting conscience. The officers from the special section came on the 3rd day. 2 captains with stone faces. They sat by my bed and opened folders. "Tell us, Sergeant, how did the group perish? How did Lieutenant Gromov die?" I looked out the window, where a green poplar branch swayed, a living branch in a world where there is no war. I could have told the truth. I could have told how we raped, how we killed, how we betrayed the commander for a sip of water. Then the tribunal, execution, or 15 years of camps awaited me. It would have been fair. It would have been an atonement. But I was a coward again. "Lieutenant Gromov!" My tongue moved in my mouth like a dry leaf. "He died like a hero. He was covering the group's retreat. We fell into an ambush. There were hundreds. We resisted until the last cartridge. The boys all fell. Gromov blew himself up with a grenade so as not to surrender." The captains looked at each other. One of them noted something down. "But you, how did you survive?" "I was concussed, covered with stones. They thought I was dead." They believed me or pretended to believe me. They needed heroes, not traitors. They needed a beautiful legend for the newspapers, not the dirty truth about what man becomes in war. In 1 month, they handed me the Order of the Red Star, for courage and heroism. When the general screwed the ruby star onto my tunic, it seemed to me that a hot nail was being driven into my chest. That star burned my skin. It was the color of that blood in the stream. I returned home, to Ryazan. My mother cried with happiness, hugged me, stroked my shaven head. My neighbors looked with respect. Afghan vet, hero, defender. They invited me to school to tell the pioneers about feats of valor, and I told them. I went out to the blackboard, looked into the clean eyes of children, and lied. I told the legend about the heroic Lieutenant Gromov, about the unyielding soldier Kuznetsov, about the fearless Polyanin. I stole their deaths, turning their shame into a feat of valor. But the most terrible trial was not the school. 6 months later, I went to her, to the address I found at the military commissariat, the city of Tula, Lenin Street, House 5, Apartment 12. That's where Gromov's mother lived. She opened the door, a small, dried-up old woman in an old knitted headscarf. When she found out who I was, she started crying and pulled me into the apartment like a son. "Ion, you are alive, my Andrei's comrade." We sat in the tiny kitchen, clocks ticking. On the table stood a cabbage pie and a bottle of vodka. On the wall hung Gromov's portrait with a black ribbon. He looked at me from the photo, young, smiling, still alive. And in his eyes I read, "Well, what? You sold me. You're living." "Tell me," the mother begged, squeezing my hands with her dry, hot palms. "Tell me how he died. Did he suffer?" "No," I said firmly, looking at the bridge of her nose. "Instantly. A sniper's bullet. He didn't even understand. He saved us all, Maria Ivanovna. If it weren't for him—" She listened, nodded, and her tears dripped into the tea. And then she did something that made me almost howl out loud, like a wounded beast. She kissed my hand. "Thank you, son. Thank you for being with him. Thank you for telling the truth. Now I am at peace. My son is a hero." I walked out of her stairwell swaying like a drunk, although I hadn't drunk a single gram. I vomited in a snow pile. I was turned inside out by my own baseness. I had received forgiveness I didn't deserve. I had stolen from a mother the right to know the truth about her son, but in return I gave her pride. Was this mercy? Or was it the last, most terrible sin? Years passed. The Union collapsed. The country for which we died and killed disappeared. But my war did not end. It moved into my head. I never got married. Women ran from me. They felt that black hole inside, that coldness emanating from my soul. In every woman, I saw that Afghan girl, in every look, her plea. I started drinking. Vodka became my only medicine. Only when I got drunk to unconsciousness did the voices in my head fall silent. Gromov's voice, shouting, "Traitor!" Kuznetsov's voice, calling his mother. The laughter of the Mujahideen. Every year, on May 17th, the day of our death, I pour myself a glass of water, ordinary clean tap water. I put it in front of me and watch. I see how the transparent liquid darkens. I see red streaks in it. I taste iron and salt on my lips. I try to drink, but my throat tightens in a spasm. That old man, Halimbek, was right. They didn't kill me. They did something worse to me. They let me live, to live with the memory. I am a living letter. I am a monument to human vileness. I walk the earth. I breathe. I eat. I sleep. But I died there in the canyon in the year 1983, together with them. They buried only their bodies, but my body continues to carry a dead soul. Sometimes, at night, I dream the same dream. I am standing by the stream again. The water is clean and cold. Next to me is a living Gromov, a living Kuznetsov, a living Afghan girl. We are all laughing. We are simply people. There is no war, there is no betrayal. But then I wake up in the empty apartment, in the dark, and I hear the water dripping from the tap. Drip, drip, drip. Like the countdown of my personal infinite hell. The end. Was this history just a story about the past, or did you see in it the reflection of the eternal questions of conscience? Are you ready for the fact that the truth can be more frightening than any lie? Write in the comments how you would have acted in the main hero's place. Would you have chosen death with honor, or life with shame? Like if this story touched your soul. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new and even more piercing dramas about human destinies in the grinder of history.